I still remember the smell, not just smoke, but fabric, metal, and memory burning away in that barrel. My son's Marine dress blues, the uniform he was buried in, then gifted back to me by his unit commander. In flames. I stood paralyzed, watching the security footage for the fourth time as Karen Pierce, president of our homeowners association, laughed while feeding pieces of my dead son's uniform into fire. "One less eyesore on our pristine street," she said, tossing in his service medals. The two board members with her chuckled nervously. They knew crossing this line meant something, even if they pretended otherwise. I had disobeyed her precious HOA rules by creating a memorial on my front porch. She responded by destroying the only physical connection I had left to my boy. The police called it a civil dispute. The neighbors whispered but did nothing. Karen believed she was untouchable in her position of small-town power. She had no idea what was coming. No idea that by burning that uniform, she had not just disrespected my son, she had committed a federal crime against a grieving father who had nothing left to lose. That day, I made her a promise she could not hear. This fight was just beginning. Every morning for the past 3 years, I wake before the sun. I make coffee the way Thomas liked it, black and strong enough to stand a spoon in. I sit on my front porch. I salute the memorial I built, and I talk to my son who is not there. This is how I survive each day since the Marines brought me the news that Staff Sergeant Thomas James Walker would not be coming home from his 3rd tour. Our street is quiet at dawn. Most of my neighbors are still asleep in their identical houses with their identical lawns. Willow Creek Estates, a respectable neighborhood with respectable people. I moved here with my wife Rebecca before she passed from cancer 8 years ago. Thomas was our only child, a miracle baby the doctors said we would never have. Now both of them are gone, and I remain. James Walker, age 64, retired construction foreman, widower, and father to a fallen hero. The memorial sits on my covered front porch, protected from rain and visible to all who pass. A glass display case holding Thomas's dress blues, mounted with precision. His medals arranged exactly as regulations dictate: Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Good Conduct. The folded flag they handed me at Arlington rests in a triangular case beside a photograph of him, tall and proud in his uniform, that crooked smile he got from his mother. Sometimes I touch the glass and pretend I can feel the fabric underneath. It is as close as I will ever come to touching my son again. My faith keeps me standing. Every Sunday I attend First Baptist, where Thomas was baptized at age 12. Pastor Michael prays with me on the difficult days. His own son serves in the army now. "God sees your tribute," he tells me. "He honors your boy as you honor him." This sustains me when the emptiness threatens to swallow everything. I first noticed Karen Pierce at a neighborhood barbecue last summer. Bright blonde hair styled expensively. Designer sunglasses pushed up on her head. Voice that carried across conversations like she was entitled to be heard by everyone. She had just moved in and immediately ran for HOA president. Won by promising to restore property values and enforce standards that had grown lax. I paid little attention. HOA matters seemed trivial when compared to what I had lost. The first notice came taped to my door in September. Violation of exterior decoration guidelines. Non-conforming military memorabilia must be removed within 7 days. I read it twice, certain it was a mistake. I had maintained this memorial for nearly 3 years without complaint. I walked to Karen's house that evening and knocked on her door. "Mr. Walker," she said, not inviting me in, "I assume this is about the citation." "There must be some misunderstanding," I said. "This memorial honors my son who died serving our country." Karen sighed like I was a child refusing to understand simple instructions. "The bylaws clearly state that front porches must remain clear of personal items. Military decoration or not, rules are rules." "That memorial stays," I said, my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. "My son gave everything for this country. I will not dishonor him." "Everyone has sob stories, Mr. Walker," she replied, checking her watch impatiently. 7 days to comply or fines begin accruing." I stood straighter the way Thomas would have. "Do what you must, but that memorial does not move." 2 days later, another notice arrived. This one with final warning stamped in red across the top. Karen had also added a personal note. Your grief does not exempt you from community standards. Remove the display or face consequences. That evening I sat beside Thomas's memorial as darkness fell. I spoke to him as I always do. They want me to take down your tribute, son. They think it is an eyesore. But I made you a promise at Arlington. As long as I draw breath, your sacrifice will not be forgotten. I turned on the porch light, the same light I leave burning every night so my boy can find his way home in spirit. Let them try, I whispered. The flag still flies here. The first fine arrived in an official-looking envelope. $50 for continued noncompliance with exterior decoration standards. I placed it in my desk drawer without a second thought. The following week, another envelope. $100 this time. The week after that, $200. Karen was escalating, testing my resolve with each new sum. Neighbors began to notice. Margaret from across the street brought me a casserole one evening. "I am so sorry about all this, James," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "What she is doing is not right, but my husband says we cannot get involved. Karen has already threatened the Millers with violations over their fence height." "I understand," I told her, accepting the food I did not need. "This is my fight." By November, the fines totaled over $2,000. Each notice came with increasingly threatening language about liens and property seizure. I began documenting everything, photographing each letter, recording dates and amounts in a ledger. If this was going to become a legal battle, I would be prepared. Pastor Michael offered to speak with Karen after Sunday service. "Perhaps she just needs to understand the spiritual significance," he suggested. "Many people respond to a message of compassion." I agreed, though I doubted Karen was capable of such understanding. The following day, Pastor Michael called me. His voice sounded strained. "James, I spoke with Mrs. Pierce this morning. I am afraid it did not go well." "What happened?" I asked. "She laughed when I mentioned your faith, said, and I quote, 'God has no jurisdiction in HOA matters.' When I explained the memorial's importance to your healing process, she suggested you get therapy instead of cluttering up the neighborhood." He paused. "I am sorry, James. Some hearts are harder to reach." That evening, I received an email from Karen addressed to all homeowners. She had attached photographs of various violations throughout the neighborhood, including my memorial. At the bottom, she wrote, "Religious appeals will not be considered. HOA governance is based on legal contracts, not personal beliefs. All violations must be addressed regardless of emotional attachments." The public mockery of my faith stung almost as deeply as the disrespect to Thomas. That night, I made a decision. I contacted Veterans Legal Defense Network, an organization that provides free legal representation to service members and their families. I explained my situation in a lengthy email attaching photographs of the memorial and copies of all HOA communications. 2 days later, a lawyer named Daniel Hernandez called me. "Mr. Walker, I have reviewed your case," he said. "What this HOA president is doing likely violates several federal protections, including religious expression rights and laws specifically protecting military honors." "What should I do?" I asked. "Document everything. Continue to stand your ground. Do not remove the memorial under any circumstances," Daniel advised. "And most importantly, install security cameras if you have not already. People like this Karen often escalate when they feel their authority is being challenged." That same afternoon, a certified letter arrived from the HOA. Inside was a formal notice of intent to place a lien on my property for unpaid fines, now totaling $3,750. At the bottom, Karen had written a personal note. "This is your final opportunity to comply before legal action. The memorial must be removed by Friday." I installed 4 security cameras that evening, one facing the memorial, one covering my driveway, one on the backyard, and one with a view of the street. Daniel had warned me to be prepared. "These situations can escalate quickly," he said. "Evidence will be our strongest ally." That night I sat beside Thomas's memorial, watching the flag gently move in the breeze. "I will not let them erase you, son," I promised. "Not now, not ever." The medals gleamed in the porch light, honors earned with blood and sacrifice. Karen could send all the letters she wanted. Some things were worth any cost to protect. Sunday mornings have always been sacred to me. I rise earlier than usual, polish my shoes the way Thomas taught me, and dress in my best suit. First Baptist Church has been my spiritual home for over 30 years. The familiar hymns and prayers give structure to a life that lost its foundation when my son died. That particular Sunday in April began like any other. Pastor Michael's sermon focused on perseverance through trials, words that seemed chosen specifically for my situation. I found comfort in the scripture and the community of faithful who had supported me through my darkest hours. I returned home shortly after noon, my spirit lighter than it had been in weeks. The feeling evaporated the moment I turned onto our street. Something was wrong. Even from a distance, I could see my porch looked different, empty. The memorial was gone. The flag case, the uniform display, the photograph of Thomas, all vanished. My hands trembled so badly I could barely park the car. I stumbled from the driver's seat and ran to the porch, touching the bare space where my son's memory had been honored for 3 years. A printed notice was taped to my front door. Violation remediated per HOA Bylaw 7.3 regarding abandoned personal property on common-facing areas. Abandoned? They had called my son's memory abandoned. I rushed inside to my computer and pulled up the security camera footage. The timestamp showed 10:47 a.m. during church service. 3 figures approached my porch. Corinne Pierce wearing gardening gloves and a determined expression. Behind her, 2 men I recognized from HOA board meetings, Stuart Gaines and Peter Hoffman. They worked methodically, dismantling the display case. Corinne directed them like a general commanding troops, pointing and issuing orders I could not hear through the soundless footage. They loaded everything into the back of Peter's SUV. The flag case, the photograph, my son's uniform. I fast-forwarded through empty footage until they returned at 11:36 a.m. The vehicle was empty. Where had they taken Thomas's things? A second camera had captured activity behind the HOA community building. I switched to that feed with growing dread. The 3 of them stood around a metal barrel, the kind used for burning trash. Corinne removed items from a box, my son's uniform, piece by piece. She fed the sacred fabric into the flames, laughing as she did so. The metals followed, tossed in like worthless trinkets. "One less eyesore on our pristine street," I read her lips saying as she held up the photograph of Thomas before adding it to the fire. "Maybe now he will get professional help instead of turning our neighborhood into a shrine." Stuart looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Peter actively laughed along with Corinne, making a mocking salute toward the barrel. They stood watching until everything had burned, then walked away as if they had completed nothing more significant than disposing of garden waste. I stumbled outside, collapsing in my driveway. The empty flag case, the only item they had left behind, fell from my hands and cracked on the concrete. A neighbor across the street watched through parted curtains but quickly disappeared when I looked up. No one came to help. No one wanted to get involved. When I could finally stand again, I called the police. 2 officers arrived 30 minutes later, viewing the security footage with stoic expressions. "I am sorry for your loss, sir," the older officer said, "but this appears to be a civil matter between you and your HOA." "They destroyed a military uniform," I said, my voice breaking. "They burned my son's medals, his Purple Heart. How is that not a crime?" "The HOA documentation suggests they believed they had legal authority to remove items from the porch," the officer replied, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "As for the destruction, it would be difficult to prove malicious intent rather than disposal of confiscated items. I suggest you consult a civil attorney." They left me with a case number and empty platitudes. I sat on my bare porch until darkness fell, staring at the space where Thomas's memory had been honored. The porch light, the one I kept burning for him, illuminated nothing but emptiness now. I called Daniel Hernandez from Veterans Legal Defense Network. My voice was raw from hours of silent tears. "They burned his uniform," was all I could say at first. "They burned everything." "Do you have it recorded?" Daniel asked, his voice sharp with sudden interest. "Yes," I answered, "every second of it." "James," he said slowly, "what they have done is not just cruel. It is illegal on multiple federal levels. Send me the footage immediately. Everything is about to change." Response began as a ripple, then swelled into a tidal wave. Daniel Hernandez did not just file a civil lawsuit, he ignited a movement. Within 48 hours of receiving my security footage, the Veterans Legal Defense Network had assembled a team of 5 attorneys. They filed an emergency injunction against the HOA and Crazy Pierce personally, citing violations of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, religious liberty protections, and desecration of military honors. What she did crosses multiple lines, Daniel explained during our first formal meeting. Burning a military uniform with decorations is potentially a federal offense. Timing the theft during church services demonstrates religious discrimination. And using the Postal Service to deliver threatening notices about your memorial creates mail fraud implications. I sat in their office, surrounded by legal minds who saw in my loss something worth fighting for. I just want justice for Thomas, I told them. I want her to understand what she destroyed. She will understand, Daniel promised. This goes far beyond your neighborhood now. He was right. The Veterans Legal Defense Network released edited portions of the security footage to select media outlets. By nightfall, Thomas's story was trending nationwide. Veterans groups organized a motorcade past my home, hundreds of bikes and vehicles flying American flags in solidarity. My phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, veterans, and strangers offering support. The American Legion issued a formal statement condemning the desecration of military honors and the disrespect shown to a Gold Star father. The state VFW chapter announced a college scholarship in Thomas's name. A retired Marine general sent me a handwritten letter that simply said, "We stand with you, brother. Semper Fi." Crazy Pierce remained defiant. She agreed to an interview with a local news station, sitting in her immaculate living room wearing pearls and an expression of practiced concern. "While we sympathize with Mr. Walker's loss," she said directly to camera, "his grief does not excuse him from community standards that all homeowners agreed to upon purchase." The items were removed after multiple warnings and disposed of according to HOA protocol. The reporter whose brother had served in Afghanistan pressed her, "You burned a Purple Heart medal. How is that appropriate disposal?" Crazy's smile faltered momentarily. "The manner of disposal is being mischaracterized. We simply removed unauthorized items from community-facing property." The security footage played immediately following her interview. Her words, her laughter, her mockery exposed for all to see. By morning, Crazy's personal and business social media accounts had been flooded with thousands of comments. The real estate agency where she worked as a broker placed her on administrative leave. Daniel called with updates daily. "The FBI has requested our evidence," he told me one afternoon. "This has escalated beyond civil courts. Federal prosecutors are reviewing the case for potential criminal charges." "Criminal charges?" I asked, surprised despite everything. "For burning a uniform, for desecrating military honors with malicious intent," Daniel clarified. "There are specific statutes protecting these symbols. Add in religious discrimination, potential mail fraud in her threatening notices, and conspiracy charges for involving the other board members. She is facing serious legal jeopardy." Neighbors who had remained silent began stopping by, not just with casseroles and apologies, but with evidence. Margaret brought printed emails showing Crazy had specifically targeted homes displaying religious symbols or military connections. The Hendersons had recordings of HOA meetings where Crazy mocked religious freaks and military worship. Each new piece strengthened the case against her. 3 weeks after the burning, I received a package from a Marine unit stationed overseas. Inside was a hand-sewn quilted flag with signatures and messages from dozens of active-duty Marines. "Your son's honor lives in all of us," read the accompanying letter. "We stand watch with you now." I hung it on my porch that evening. By morning, neighbors had placed small American flags along my walkway. Someone had painted Thomas Walker Memorial Drive on a piece of wood and mounted it below the street sign. The tide had turned completely. Daniel called that afternoon, his voice charged with excitement. "James, a Congressional Veterans Affairs Committee has opened an inquiry, and federal agents have requested Crazy's financial records and HOA documentation. This is moving faster than any case I have ever handled. For the first time since that Sunday, I allowed myself to believe that justice might actually come. The arrest happened on a Tuesday evening during the monthly HOA board meeting. Karen had called the meeting specifically to discuss ongoing legal harassment from my baseless claims. Neighbors later told me she had been particularly venomous that night, threatening to increase HOA dues to cover legal expenses and warning that any homeowners who supported me would face enhanced scrutiny of their properties. Federal agents entered the community center meeting room at precisely 7:43 p.m., 4 of them in dark suits, badges visible. The room fell silent as they approached the front table where Karen presided. "Karen Pierce?" the lead agent asked, though everyone knew exactly who she was. "Yes, we are in the middle of a meeting," she replied, irritation evident in her voice. "You will need to wait." "Karen Pierce, you are under arrest for violations of federal law, including destruction of protected military honors, religious discrimination, conspiracy, and mail fraud." The agent read her Miranda rights as another moved behind her chair with handcuffs. Stuart Gaines and Peter Hoffman, who had helped her burn Thomas's uniform, sat frozen on either side of her. Karen looked to them for support, but their eyes were fixed on the table. "This is ridiculous," Karen protested as the handcuffs clicked shut. "This is about an HOA violation, not some federal case. Tell them," she demanded of Stuart and Peter. Neither man spoke. They had already made their calculations. According to Daniel, both had contacted federal prosecutors the previous day, offering testimony in exchange for leniency. They would detail how Karen had planned the theft during church services specifically to target my faith, how she had bragged about teaching the military worshiper a lesson, and how she had explicitly ordered the burning of the uniform and medals. The community watched in stunned silence as Karen was led from the building. No one moved to help her. No one spoke in her defense. The small authority she had wielded so cruelly had evaporated in an instant. By morning, her arrest was national news. The indictment, when it came, ran to 27 pages. The charges were more extensive than even Daniel had anticipated. Desecration of military honors, civil rights violations based on religious discrimination, mail fraud for using postal services to deliver fraudulent violation notices, conspiracy, even destruction of veteran memorial objects, a specific federal crime I had not known existed. Stuart and Peter accepted plea deals, admitting their roles while providing detailed testimony about Karen's actions and statements. Their sentences would be light, probation and community service at veterans' organizations. Karen refused any deal, maintaining her position that HOA rules gave her authority to remove and dispose of the memorial. On the day of the preliminary hearing, I wore my best suit with Thomas's dog tags hidden beneath my shirt. Daniel had warned me the proceedings would be difficult. "She will attack your character," he said. "Try to paint you as unstable or attention-seeking. Remember that the evidence speaks for itself." What Daniel had not told me, perhaps because he had not known, was that Marines would be there. As I walked up the courthouse steps, I noticed them. 24 Marines in dress blues forming a silent honor guard. They did not speak. They simply stood at attention as I passed between their lines. Inside the courtroom, more veterans filled the gallery. Some wore uniforms from different branches. Others came in civilian clothes with military caps or insignia. They had come to ensure Thomas's honor would be defended. Karen entered with her attorney, a polished man from an expensive firm. She walked with artificial confidence until she saw the gallery filled with service members. For a brief moment, fear flashed across her face. It was the first genuine emotion I had seen from her. The prosecutor, a former military JAG officer now working for the Justice Department, presented the government's case with cold precision. The security footage played on monitors throughout the courtroom. Karen's voice echoed as she mocked my son's service while feeding his uniform into flames. Her laughter as she tossed his Purple Heart into the fire. The courtroom remained absolutely silent throughout, save for the sound of Karen's own voice condemning her. The judge denied bail, citing flight risk and the particularly callous nature of the alleged crimes. Karen was led away in handcuffs once more. As the courtroom emptied, a young Marine approached me. Staff Sergeant Walker was my commanding officer in Afghanistan, he said quietly. He saved my life. We will be here every day until this is finished. Trial began 4 months later. Summer had given way to fall, and the courthouse maple trees blazed with color as I climbed the steps each morning. The same honor guard of Marines appeared daily, though their faces sometimes changed as different units sent representatives. They never spoke about their presence. They simply stood as silent witnesses to ensure justice for one of their own. The prosecution built their case methodically. Corinne's defense strategy crumbled as neighbor after neighbor testified about her systematic targeting of religious symbols and military displays throughout the community. Margaret described how Corinne had fined her for a small cross wreath during Christmas. The Hendersons played recordings of her mocking religious nuts during HOA meetings. Veterans living in the community detailed how she had targeted their property specifically, ignoring similar violations by non-military homeowners. Stuart Gaines and Peter Hoffman testified on the third day. Both men appeared diminished, shame evident in their posture and voices. Stuart described how Corinne had specifically planned the removal during church services. She said it was perfect timing because he would be busy talking to his imaginary friend in the sky, Stuart testified, unable to meet my eyes. Peter's testimony proved even more damaging. She said burning the uniform would ensure he could never display it again, he told the silent courtroom. She specifically mentioned the medals, said they were probably fake anyway, and that, he paused, visibly uncomfortable, that his son probably died because he was stupid, not because he was brave. Corinne's expression remained cold throughout their testimony. She whispered constantly to her attorney, shaking her head as if everyone else was lying. When her turn came to testify, her attorney advised against it, but she insisted. Her testimony revealed her completely. "I was simply enforcing the rules everyone agreed to," she said repeatedly. "His grief does not make him special. His son's choice of profession does not make him above the law." "Did you specifically target Mr. Walker's religious practices?" the prosecutor asked. "I scheduled community maintenance when it was convenient," she replied with a dismissive wave. "If he chooses to be absent from his property for religious reasons, that is his scheduling issue, not mine." "And the burning of the uniform and medals, was that standard HOA disposal protocol?" For the first time, Corinne hesitated. We needed to ensure the items would not be returned to community property. The prosecutor played the security footage again, Corinne's laughter, her mocking salute. "Is this the behavior of someone following protocol, Ms. Pierce, or someone taking pleasure in causing pain?" She had no answer. On the final day of testimony, the prosecutor asked if I would like to make a statement about my son. The judge allowed it, though Corinne's attorney objected strenuously. I walked to the witness stand and pulled a folded paper from my pocket, the last letter Thomas had sent me from overseas. "My son wrote this 3 weeks before he died," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "He said, 'Dad, sometimes I wonder if what we are doing here makes a difference. Then I remember what you taught me, that standing for something bigger than yourself is always worth the cost. I wear this uniform for the guys beside me, for you and Mom, and for people back home who will never know my name. Some things are worth protecting, no matter the price.'" I looked directly at Corinne. "My son died protecting the very freedoms that allowed you to burn his uniform. He would have defended your right to be cruel, even as he lived his life with honor. That is the difference between you and him." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. The verdict was unanimous on all counts: guilty. At sentencing 2 weeks later, Corinne finally showed emotion. As the judge described her crimes as a moral failure and a national disgrace, she crumbled in her seat. The sentence was harsh: 5 years in federal prison, substantial financial restitution, and a public apology to be published in national veterans publications. The HOA was dissolved by court order and placed under federal receivership pending formation of new leadership, explicitly prohibited from discriminating against religious or military displays. Stuart and Peter received probation and community service requirements at the local VA hospital. As Corinne was led away, she looked back at me once. I saw not the arrogant woman who had tormented me, but someone finally understanding the magnitude of what she had destroyed. Winter passed. Spring arrived with gentle rains that washed the neighborhood clean. The federal receivership had transformed our community governance. The new board, elected in February, included 2 veterans and a pastor from a nearby church. Their first act was to establish a Community Memorial Protection Act, ensuring that tributes to fallen service members would be respected and preserved. Neighbors who had once been afraid to speak now stopped by regularly. Margaret brought flowers each Sunday after church. The Hendersons' teenage son volunteered to mow my lawn. Small kindnesses that formed a protective circle around the space Thomas had left behind. On the first anniversary of Corinne's arrest, something unexpected happened. A convoy of trucks arrived early in the morning. Marines in work clothes unloaded building materials on my front lawn. A sergeant approached my door with architectural drawings. "Sir, with your permission, we would like to build something permanent for Staff Sergeant Walker." Over the next 3 days, they constructed a new memorial on my porch. Not a simple display case, but something beautiful and lasting. A custom-built monument of polished wood and etched glass. A Marine emblem carved with perfect precision. Space for the replacement flag that had been presented to me by a congressional representative. A small waterproof compartment held a new set of Thomas's medals, donated by his unit. When they finished, the sergeant handed me an envelope. "Every Marine in his battalion contributed, sir. This memorial is now protected by federal law as an official military monument. No one can ever touch it without committing a federal offense." On Memorial Day, I hosted a gathering on my front lawn. Not just neighbors, but veterans from across the state. Pastor Michael led a prayer service that drew people from different faiths and backgrounds. Children placed small flags around the memorial. A Marine honor guard performed a formal ceremony. I stood tall, wearing Thomas's dog tags outside my shirt for the first time. Later that summer, I was invited to speak to young Marines at a nearby training facility. I told them about Thomas, about his service, his sacrifice, his faith, about standing firm when it would be easier to give in. "Honor is not something you display," I told them. "It is something you live even when, especially when, others try to take it from you." The young faces looking back at me reminded me of Thomas at their age. Earnest, determined, ready to stand for something larger than themselves. In them, I saw my son's legacy continuing. Each night, I still perform my ritual. I sit on the porch beside the memorial. I talk to Thomas about my day. And as darkness falls, I turn on the porch light, brighter now, illuminating the memorial so it can be seen clearly from the street. Sometimes cars slow down as they pass. Veterans salute. Parents explain to their children what the memorial means. Corinne serves her sentence in a federal facility hundreds of miles away. Her public apology was published as required, though the words rang hollow to those who knew the truth. She lost everything, her freedom, her reputation, her power. I take no joy in her downfall. Thomas would not have wanted that. What I wanted, what I received, was justice. Not vengeance, but the affirmation that some things remain sacred, that a uniform represents more than cloth and thread, that faith deserves respect even from those who do not share it, and that a father's promise to honor his fallen son will not be broken, not by anger, not by bureaucracy, not by cruelty. The porch light stays on, for Thomas, for all who serve, for justice remembered.